So our main focus is teaching folks how to think bigger when it comes to what's possible for investing. And then also thinking like not a retail trader, but thinking like an institutional investor, regardless of how much money you have.
Welcome everybody. My name is Haresh Singhani. This is Conversations with Haresh. We'll be talking to people of varied backgrounds, covering various topics. I'm very excited to be able to share these with you. The goal is to increase curiosity and empathy amongst all of us to help us grow professionally and personally at all levels. And of course, we also want to make sure that this is fun. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to having you.
Good morning, Jolyn. How are you?
Great. Good morning to you too. Thank you for having me.
I hope you had a wonderful Labor Day with family and friends. And I know you're in Seattle like I am. We had wonderful weather. So hopefully you did as well, wherever you were or in Seattle.
Yeah, we had a great time. Actually, we call it Leisure Day now. Not Labor. It's Leisure Day for us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it fits, right, with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. So Jolyn, tell us, the audience, a little bit about kind of your life story. You're working on several initiatives that are very interesting, but I'm also curious, Jolyn's journey as a person, as is our audience is, right? So feel free to share just to give us a picture of Jolyn.
I live in Seattle, born and raised in Seattle. I feel like that's rare nowadays. We have a lot of transplants, but so I've seen all of the changes. I've gotten lost in my old neighborhoods because everything is different. So born and raised in Seattle. I have a background in art and law, which is
unique combination.
Yeah, sides of the spectrum. But I grew up in a very creative and artistic family. So growing in my family, they're either a musician and or an artist or some combination of that type of express creativity. Yeah, so I got homesick, actually. Now, what's interesting, well, it's interesting to me. So Oprah and I, we have the same birthday, right? January 29th. And I took that as a sign that I was supposed to be Oprah's attorney. And so I went to school in Illinois, but didn't realize that you study so much, you don't have time to check on Oprah and her show at the time. So while I was in law school, she actually stopped her show. So I never got to meet her. But that's what initially started it. I was like, I'm going to be Oprah's attorney. I got homesick, moved back to Seattle, became a criminal prosecuting attorney. And that's where I started to get into conflict about function and impact. There's a tremendous amount of pride in my family, amongst my friends and everyone, about being an attorney. But to me, it was just a function. It's just like, oh, this is just something I can do. Mm-hmm. But my heart wasn't in it because I felt like I was standing right at the precipice of the school to prison pipeline. Or in my last rotation, I was in Superior Court, which is where the juveniles are prosecuted. And many of the youth that were coming into the courtroom and going through the system were from my neighborhood, or I knew their family, or there was just some connection. 'Cause one of the things they don't tell you when you're a prosecutor, they don't tell you how hard it is to prosecute in your own community. So oftentimes I had to recuse myself for a conflict to the point where it was kind of hard for me to do my job without a second prosecutor on hand because half of the caseload I would know.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Was that because of the work you were doing outside or all your life, like volunteering and stuff, so that you were acquainted with a lot more people?
Yeah.
Or is this like a typical of somebody in the community?
I was in the community, like doing work in the community. I did all types of internships. I just knew a lot of people, and so that was pretty difficult. And so
Superior Court, that's part of the King County court system, is that right? Or was it a different jurisdiction?
This was King County.
Okay. And so you were in the DA staff?
Yeah, which they call PA for prosecuting attorney.
Oh, got it. Okay, sure.
New York, they say DA, but out here it's PA for prosecuting.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. Seeing these youth just kind of be at a point where their whole life could be ruined from a dumb mistake they made. I just decided that this wasn't for me. And I was like, there has to be an alternative. And not to mention, working 80 jillion hours a week, super stressed out, all of that. I just needed to take some time and kind of reevaluate. And I was talking to my undergrad professor, and she asked me before I even got into law school, she's like, if you don't go to law school, what will you do or what will you be? And without even hesitating, I said, I'll be an artist. And she reminded me of that conversation because I was at a time where I didn't know what I was going to do because I thought to myself, oh my gosh, Haresh, I spent all this money on law school. Law school's really expensive. And am I just going to, throw it all away? And it was a lot. It was a lot, And so
Where was this? The law school?
Illinois. And then I moved back home. At that point, I decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to do art. I almost forgot that I could paint. So I started painting. I became an award-winning artist and an award-winning curator. And then because of my law background, I start to recognize all of the inequities in art. And some of the things I was starting to see was that how difficult it was for young, Black, and POC to get gallery representation as an emerging artist. And so I thought to myself, how can we leverage technology to remedy this? And I came up with this, idea that involves augmented reality and virtual walls for the galleries and all that kind of stuff. And I told one of my friends about it, and he was like, oh, that's a really great idea. So I hit the pavement. I was like, I can, so MVP, I could do this. Hit the pavement, started talking to different investors, and every investor said, Jolyn, the way my portfolio is set up, I don't really know too much about art, I think it's a great idea, but I don't feel comfortable because I don't know that much about art. And so, after getting told no 80 jillion times, actually, it wasn't 80 jillion times. It was exactly, I got told no 9 times. But I didn't let that stop me. I just kind of took a beat. And I was talking to a really good friend of mine about it. He's like, well, I still think it's a really good idea. This is the first friend that I told. He's like, I still think it's a really good idea. He's like, in fact, I'm going to give you a blank check for the development of it. And that friend was Mark Monroe, my now business. So we went on to develop it. It's still it's developed, but we use it for other things now. And I told him, we just started talking about all kinds of things that had to do with, our community when it comes to the racial wealth gap and it's all these things. And I told him I wanted to retire again for the second time. And he taught me how to invest.
Mm-hmm.
I kept this journal for over a year, my first year of investing, of all the highs, the lows, the tears, all of that. Once I got to a point where I didn't have to work anymore because I could just live off the interest for my investing, It was just one of those things that changed my life. And I was like, more people should experience this. Mark and I were talking and he was like, are we doing this? I was like, I guess we are. And then that's when we started our YouTube channel called the Come Up Series, where we teach people how to think about markets, how to think about wealth building.
So in that platform or in the Come Up Series and whatever you and Mark have kind of iterated over the years, is it more about promoting or educating more people on techniques and opportunities that exist? Or are you creating new, trading algorithms or investing techniques that don't exist at all previously? Or is it a combination?
It's a bit of a combination. So our main focus is teaching folks how to think bigger when it comes to what's possible for investing. And then also thinking not a retail trader, but thinking like an institutional investor, regardless of how much money you have, almost as a placeholder for when you do have a lot of money, and learning about the markets, but then also learning about the public side of wealth building. But now we've moved into teaching more about the private side of wealth building through startups and what does it look like to have a startup. And that's pretty much why we had the Innovation Tech Summit that we had back in, what was that, July?
July, yeah.
Yeah, the Tech Wealth Summit was something that really was born out of the work we had been doing for the past 4 years, preparing our audience to not only invest in the market, but then know what makes a good investment. How do you go about forming a startup? Because there's multiple ways to make money. So we're focused on creating a wealth ladder. So one of the rungs, stock market, another rung may be startup, another rung may be, commercial real estate or whatever, just different ways. But we're kind of doing it rung by rung. And really the idea is that once you've attained one rung on the ladder, or you've learned enough about a rung, then you go back and you teach somebody else and bring them with you. And that's how our audience has grown with that reach.
I see. And is there a monetization as a part of this? Are you Is this a give back, or are you actually monetizing it by saying, okay, if you're a subscriber, you get access to a certain club, and I'm just speculating, right?
No,
Or is this give back, and then you'll probably have, interesting people or talented individuals who participate in this ecosystem that you might have an opportunity to invest with or to work with, right? Which is a way to get some returns kind of organically or via osmosis. So it's not a directly monetized platform, right? You're just trying to elevate or bring up all the boats and make them educated on how to create wealth through investing. Is that accurate?
yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, we definitely do not charge for the education in the knowledge. We just don't. We don't need to. We're at a place and space where it's not necessary for our business model. And coming onto the scene, that was pretty disruptive. Being able to offer incredible value and not charge anything. And it's mainly because there's a sense of urgency too. We can't put up yet another barrier.
I see.
Well, not even closing the wealth gap, but like to building this wealth ladder. We can't put up another barrier.
Got it.
The only thing we've ever charged for was the summit, because that, takes a lot to put on.
Yeah, those are very expensive events. And I know that in speaking with Mark, I understood that the planning was done in the middle of the year when a lot of the sponsors have already committed their resources elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But those are definitely expensive events. We do our events, High Tech Advisors, which is a combination of some of our marketing efforts and also some community building. We've done actually 4 or 5 events talking about different domains and impact AI will have and generative AI will have on those domains, right? And I hope you get to make it to the next one.
I'm looking forward to it.
Most excellent.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we know too well what it takes to create these events, even though our events are at a smaller scale. But in some ways, it's the same challenge because we have fewer people and fewer resources to apply towards putting those events together. But the one nice thing, of course, the biggest joy of doing these events is that all these people meet and they collaborate and they create connections and form trust and exchange, ideas and insights and so on. Actually, people have been following up from the summit all the time, actually. Mm-hmm. Several people, including I met a gentleman who is from Minnesota, Nolan, who is in town to get his healthcare startup off the ground. It's a very interesting idea to basically create a platform that'll enable the informal caregivers or family caregivers to take care of seniors while they're still living independently. Where it's not like the software is not to be, used by senior facilities or assisted living or something like that. It's just for family members to help take care of other family members. And it's a pretty big opportunity. But I was actually impressed with the folks that attended the summit and also the efforts that you and Mark and team put in to create all of it. As you were describing how the goal is to just help everybody get better at investing and at wealth creation, right? And closing the gap, demographically speaking. But I also, as I was listening to that, I think this is something that probably everybody in general can use, right?
Oh, most definitely.
I think it's changed probably quite a bit. I mean, at the University of Washington, there's a school for entrepreneurship, which wasn't there if you go back 10, 20, 30 years, right? I mean, there was some semblance of it, but it's very different now than what it was like in the 90s that I remember. Everything feels a lot more accessible, but of course, it's still not for all audiences. But for many audiences, you can get a company started with less capital, I'm not sure if I would call it less work, but I would say maybe less startup work, or the bootstrapping is probably slightly easier, right? Especially for tech startups and so on. So in that sense, the process is becoming more democratic, which is a good thing. But I think in general, there probably isn't as much financial education being given to people of all walks and kids of all walks, right? While they're going through their high school and their college. And it's like, actually, so speaking of Labor Day, I was telling you that our kid's not here. So we got to spend it, just my wife and I. Isha, our daughter, moved to California after graduating from college. And, she did pretty well. She got her computers and marine biology degree.
Oh, cool.
They gave her a really good job, really good pay based on most accounts, and got started in downtown San Francisco. But I don't think she's adequately financially educated
Mm.
because that's just how our system is. There's no place where it's not a requirement for you to be educated on how to take care of your wealth or your finances, right? I know some high schools are now doing some classes, some colleges are doing some classes too. I think high schools are mandating them, I believe.
Yeah, but it's something that should be taught like earlier.
Early on and mandated, right? It
Yeah,
shouldn't
I
be
agree.
like a elective or something like that. And so I was just so excited to be at the summit because I actually hadn't seen, like I've been in Seattle for a long time and and I've been part of the startup ecosystem for a long time. I hadn't seen kind of thought leaders, or I didn't have a chance to meet thought leaders in the African American community that are engaged in the tech ecosystem as founders and as investors and so on. And so it was very interesting to just meet them, and people were talented and everybody was super motivated. You could tell the hustling kids in the room, and many of them genuinely, there was such an openness. So many would be like, oh, I just came here to shake your hand, and they didn't necessarily have preconceived boundaries of what was possible or what wasn't possible, which is the best way to go, right? Because you don't know what is possible till you go shake hands and start shaking trees and stuff like that, right? And
Shake things up. That's like a testament to the community that Mark and I have developed over these 4 years. I mean, we constantly stress, like, think bigger. Like, whatever you thought yesterday is not big enough. Think bigger. Be open to the possibilities. Everyone, even though the work that we do is primarily, Black centered, that doesn't mean that it's exclusive. It just means that that's the focus that we're, really paying attention to what those stats are, what those needs are. And really, like I always say, you can get in where you fit in. There's room for all of us to like stand in solidarity and move the needle forward, whether that's thinking, whether that's business, startups, all that, because you will essentially gain more from the diversity of ideas and thoughts and experience as well.
Makes sense. At High Tech Advisors, and my personal drive or framework that we use is that, everybody's in search for a meaningful life, and you can't have a meaningful life without meaningful work. And so everybody's in search for meaningful work. But that also means you have to live up to your potential, right? And capitalize on what exists out there. And so I think all of us, or more of us, should be participating in all these ecosystems, including the entrepreneurship and tech entrepreneurship and founder ecosystem, investor ecosystem, and so on.
Because we definitely have ideas, Haresh. There are so many ideas. Like in all of the communities that were present at the summit, there are so many different ideas. And oftentimes there's the idea, but maybe there's not the access to the resource. So let's just collapse the two.
Speaking with Nolan, I think it was yesterday, I was telling you the person who's doing a healthcare startup for the seniors. One thing that came up was that he has a vision for solving a pretty big problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's competition, it's fragmented market, and it's all the usual barriers are going to be there, right? If you're going to try to build something that's going to be world changing or $1 billion, right, $10 billion idea and all that stuff. And then in the process, right, like we talked about, how do you manage today? Because you got to pay the bills today before you get to that massive opportunity. And once you have client adoption and revenues and all that, things are potentially different. And so one of the mentors, Nolan, was mentioning that he was really actually extremely useful in reminding Nolan not to constrain his vision and his thinking because of today's constraints, right? Because that's when you miss out on big opportunities, right? Because you're not necessarily thinking big enough. And then you still have to fit it somehow, right? There's no long term without surviving the short term. So you can't ignore the short term. You don't want short-term constraints to constrain everything as far as what's possible in the long term or in the big vision, right? And so that's such a huge point. I come from India. I was born there, and I came here as a teenager. And back then, this is in the 40 years. I've been in Seattle for 40 years. Indian economy has grown a lot since then, and there are a lot more opportunities than there were back when I was a kid over there. But so I remember, like in India, we were extremely resource constrained as a society, right? And so risk taking was the way you thought about it was very different, right? Because you had to be super conservative because the cost of failure was very high, right? And so, whereas I think in this ecosystem locally, it's not an equal ecosystem for all of our demographics. But in general, for somebody that's motivated, there's still a lot more resources available in the US ecosystem than there would have been in the Indian ecosystem at the time.
Mm.
And so I think that we should be thinking bigger, right? I'm with you totally, because it's possible, right? We're not so poor as an economy that we can't dream big. We should be dreaming big and probably taking more risks and so on.
Especially in Seattle. This city has money.
Yeah, there's money. One of the things that's really nice, I think, about Seattle is sometimes money is important, but time and guidance is equally or even more important. And in Seattle, I think I've probably almost never seen a person who's committed and motivated that seeks help not get help.
Right.
Right? People like yourself and Mark and everybody's just available. It's like, when you see a truly committed, talented person trying to do something, there's no thought of like, how is that person going to pay you? That doesn't even enter anywhere, right? You're like, how do I help you? And, even besides just helping me, I just want to be a witness when it's happening, right? And so that's what I enjoy actually quite a bit, right? Also, and it's a privilege to witness people being successful. It's like growing trees and plants and flowers, right, that bloom from something small into something much bigger and beautiful.
To witness the genesis of it,
Exactly. And we can talk about, I guess, all these things for quite some time. I did want to ask something going back to your PA days. It's something that I've come across over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Being an employer, you get to know people quite well, I suppose. So we're consultants. We have a consulting team. So we're constantly looking for talent and deploying talent on behalf of the clients. Some clients and some of the roles require looking to see if people have records and so on, right? And a huge number of people have records, right? So what happens is, as an employer, you can't just say if you have a record, you're not qualified, right? Because you're going to leave a whole bunch of the talent outside, and it's probably not humane anyway. For multiple reasons, you can't do that, and you shouldn't do that. And so one of the flaws potentially in the system people sometimes allude to is that the PAs and the DAs and the prosecutors' offices across the country, the criminal prosecutors, they have a lot of leeway and they don't have enough scrutiny and there aren't enough checks and balances on what they do or don't do. And so I was curious if this had come up in any of your conversations or your thoughts now or before when you were actually working as an attorney, because this has come up in instances where like we've had prospective team members who, if they have a record, they explain what happened, right? Because that's one of the things. I think it's in California and Washington also, the state's requiring that employers don't just blindly say, oh, your background check came up with something and then you can't work here, right? You actually have to provide them more information and transparency if somebody's not able to join the team because of a record. And if the crime doesn't actually overlap with the role in any material way, then you can't actually disqualify those people. And so I think that's progress. But many times the explanation people have provided was that the prosecutors were overreaching. Well, they're not consistent in enforcing things. So like there are laws on the books and then certain things get enforced in certain times because of something happens, but otherwise 90% of the time nothing happens, right? And so on. So I'm just curious because prosecutors, I think it was probably in the 1990s that the number of prosecutors in the country went up astronomically. I think it was under something Mr. Clinton signed. And then since then, maybe not surprisingly, right, the number of prisoners has been rising.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
So since you played in that domain, I was curious if this is something you might have thought about before, or if you have any thoughts on this, or if other people have talked about this that kind of resonated with you.
Yeah, well, so prosecutors are held to a higher standard than most attorneys, when it comes to the evidence and how people are prosecuted. There is a lot of discretion, though, when it comes to those filing decisions. And so you have to look at the case and ascertain the weakness of it. Is this a weak case? Is this something that, we wouldn't take to court? But oftentimes from what I remember is like, say like someone, was accused of something, because right, everyone's innocent until proven guilty in a criminal court of law. So if the case was weak, but the person had a record, then because they had a record, well, instead of this case just being flat out dismissed, then maybe a plea would be offered, which is really not fair when you think about it. Like if you're arresting officers, didn't do everything by the book, to me, that's a whole that deserves the benefit of the doubt. And oftentimes, to be quite frank, that just wasn't happening. On my watch, I was finding any reason to argue that this case was something that should not be prosecuted for various reasons, especially I think I advocated harder when it was when I was in juvie, because it was a youth at stake. Like their whole life was
yeah.
Now adults, I don't think I was as gung-ho, but I still would do my best to assess the case fairly. So we have this interesting tension between innocent till proven guilty, but then prosecute. So unless the case was just completely a hopeless one, I still feel like there would have been that conversation with defense counsel.
Got it.
Hey,
yep.
We'll drop this if you plead a lesser offense, or there was this type of negotiation. Do I, agree with that 100%? No. But oftentimes that was pretty much what was happening in the court.
Got it. Okay. Do you have kids?
No. I have a huge family. Well, I have one nephew, and then all my friends' kids, we in our friend group were all aunties and uncles. And so those are all nieces and nephews as well. So a lot of very cool.
Do they come to you with money questions, life questions, growth questions?
A couple of them that ask me questions regularly. And it's so good to see, because they're young and they're asking questions about investing, purchasing stock in the things that they currently own or like. So I think it gives me hope, as far as them learning early on. My nephew is 4 now, but at the time of the Come Up series, he was born in 2020. He would watch the Come Up series. This is during the pandemic. We had never met. He just knew me from the screen, whether that was FaceTime or it was YouTube. And I remember one time I came over just to visit in the middle of them watching the Come Up series on YouTube. And he looked at the screen and then looked at me and looked at the screen. And you could just see the dissonance like registering on his face. Like, what is happening? Like, what's going on? So I think it's funny that, the first part of his life, he learned about, at least subconsciously, because, he's a little baby, money and things like that, where now he's to the point where he feels everything costs $100. So if you ask him how much this is, it's $100. Everything's $100. It's really funny. But yeah, a lot of the kids in our friend group talk about money, what they should do with their allowance, how they're going to maximize their birthday money. And we took a lot of the moms in my friend group, the ones that are moms, we kind of got together and went through our own little private, week by week investing class together that I taught them. And so their kids saw that as well. So.
Got it. Yeah, sometimes, the family is ready and sometimes it's not as ready to take the help of the experts within the family, right?
Yeah. But I always tell people you're the expert of your portfolio. So
of course,
you decide what you're trying to do. But if you want some guidance, what I don't like if somebody comes and asks a question and they've done zero research first,
yep.
That feels like a waste of my time and it feels like a dishonoring, So do your own research first, then come to me, because through your own research, you're going to have even better questions, so.
Yeah, I mean, you see this in entrepreneurship also, right? Or with founders, right? Where one of the things, we're not an investment broker in our consulting team. We're basically an outsourcing partner, right? So you can outsource product tasks or IT tasks or go-to-market tasks or initiatives or strategic initiatives, etc. But because we've been in the startup ecosystem and I've had the opportunity to be part of multiple founding teams, etc. People come to us and say, oh, I'm looking for investment, right? Then sometimes it's difficult to guide them when they haven't done their own enough homework to say, it's not easy to help you, right?
Yeah. It's like, help me help you.
Exactly. And so this is true of life in general, right? And this goes back to the earlier point about when you see talented, motivated, committed people, then they get all the help. All the people are excited to help them, or we are excited to help them.
Exactly.
But if they don't do enough on their own, then it's very difficult to kind of help them. I mean, money is and wealth is an interesting aspect of life. And how do we use it to enable and elevate our journey as opposed to, it becoming a burden, right? And becoming a source of stress.
Yeah, or over-identifying with money. Like, that's not helpful either.
Right.
To have all that money, but then you become the money or the money becomes you. Being able to separate that and looking at money as a tool, looking at it as energy, and deciding how you want to use that tool or that energy to impact and further what your own personal contribution to the world is, that's great. But the minute you start taking on all those things that just feed your ego, you're lost. In a short amount of time, you probably will lose that money.
I see. Sounds like you would suggest looking at money as a enabler or a tool, right? Not the goal in and of itself.
Right.
Right. Because then you'll lose sight of bigger things.
Right. And that goes back to thinking bigger. Like, it's not enough just to say, oh, I want to be a billionaire or multimillionaire or whatever. It's like, why? So who are you going to be? How are you going to be once you have that? So who could you be right now? Because the money's not going to make you that person. So if you want to be generous, okay, well, be generous of what you have right now. And then as you continue being generous, you will have more and more and more to be generous with. But if you, get it twisted and start to over-identify, it's going to be problematic later on. And it's really easy, especially in social media landscape now, it's really easy to like over-identify and just get caught up in the flash of it all and, flexing on the gram, as the kids say, all of that. And who cares? Like, that's not what is important. Do something bigger, leave a mark on this world,
Makes sense. Yeah. One of the challenges that I've gone through and all of us probably have gone through in life is when you're money constrained, it creates a sense of kind of insecurity, and then you're never fully free, depending upon how much of a hardship you might have experienced and for how long, right? I see this a lot in other people like me who are immigrants, because a lot of the immigrants that come to the US, we start with nothing. You don't land with a suitcase full of cash or something like that, right? Some people maybe do, but most immigrants don't. Your struggle starts day one to get a job and start paying, buying groceries, renting, buying a car, and all these things. There's a huge difference. And then the next generation, where the immigrants are the parents, that generation doesn't have to start at that level of scrappiness, right? Because the family's got a foothold, and so that generation doesn't have the same insecurity that the immigrant generation has. And so we have a very different, kind of speaking like stereotypically or on average, the immigrant generation, at least in the people that I know, I would say on average is a lot more wealth aware, or maybe, to put it less, politely, wealth insecure, which is ironic because they have a lot of wealth after a while, because they're just so motivated and so driven, right? Sometimes, anger and things like that become drivers, right? And your struggle being resource constrained or money constrained becomes a driver, saying that I'm never going to have that happen to me again, or I'm never going to have that happen to my family, right? I don't want to be in a place where, I was a high school student, which I was, and I had to work like every weekend. I'm like, I don't want that for my daughter, or,
Right. But what's interesting, we're just having this conversation with my friend group, is we all have that conversation of, our parents, provided this foundation. So now we're able to provide the next level of foundation for, the next generation. But now there's this sense of entitlement that is popping up. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what you have to do to combat it. Maybe they need to write a gratitude journal every day. I don't know, but it's getting outrageous when you think about like the access that young people have to, whether it's goods and services or certain things that now have become a standard for them. It's paired with this sense of entitlement that I don't like where that's headed. So I don't know if you have any ideas on, especially as a parent, on how to combat that. I would love to hear it.
We all have probably the same tool sets, right? Which is try to create scarcity, right?
Yeah.
I'm probably not the best example, but if you're really disciplined around like, okay, you can have this, but it's based on some achievement or some kind of effort that you put in to achieve the rewards. And so I think it was somebody from the Rockefeller family. There was like a senator or somebody, right, who or from Massachusetts. I forget where he was from, but he passed away. But he was saying that when he was growing up, one thing that, Rockefellers had more money than most of us, right?
Combined.
He said that he really appreciated, this is him talking as an old man, that his family didn't give them like handout. Like they could have afforded anything for anyone any day in the whole family, right? Name anything, including you want to buy a new house every day, they probably could have afforded one, right? And certainly they could have afforded trips and toys and all those things. But what the parents did, he was saying, was that they actually put a lot of discipline around, like you had to earn things. So you can have things, but it had to be a reward for something that you worked for. So if you want a nice dinner, and I'm just making up an example, then it's like you don't just go and say, okay, I'm going to go and spend, have $1,000 a plate dinner just because I feel like I want to eat that food today. And it's like, if that's not normal, then he's like, then my parents would say that should be an occasion with some cause. Then you can go do that, right? But not just because you're Rockefeller and you have the money and you can afford it.
Yeah, my husband, speaking of newly arrived immigrants, my husband is from Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
His mother is a entrepreneur, very business minded. And for her, I forgot if it was 14 or 15, but as soon as you hit a certain age, if you planned on living in her house, you had to start your own business. And it could have been anything. It didn't matter what it was, but you had to have a business. And I remember being in Jamaica and my brother-in-law, who I think he was 14 at the time, he had a sock business. And he asked if he could do a presentation and explain to me about his sock business. And he did. He laid all the socks out and I bought all the socks. And it was like his biggest sell. And he was so proud of himself because he did a great presentation. He was so proud of himself that he, went on to have other businesses. And that is just pretty much how my husband's family is. They're very business oriented and business minded. My husband has never worked directly for someone else. And I just appreciate that kind of spirit and mantra in his family. And I've witnessed it, him coming to America, having his vision and hitting the pavement. It's like you're being dropped in the middle of a race and you haven't had time to necessarily warm up and you just got to keep going.
Right. Speaking of techniques to maybe help fight entitlement or a sense of entitlement, I think also young people, right, just like employees in organizations or citizens in society, right, they emulate leaders. So whatever the parents are doing, it's not just what the parents are saying, it's what the parents do. They're watching and they're going to emulate it almost involuntarily. If you're disciplined with rewarding yourself, right, even when you have the means to reward yourself generously, but you're like, okay, I'm going to be, more restrained, then they're watching you. And a lot of the immigrants, for example, one thing they do a good job of, but sometimes it may backfire, I don't know, but is they live below their means, right? And that's kind of a habit you pick up because initially when you don't have that many resources, then you just figure out how to live very, very frugally. And then over time, you'll end up with more resources. A lot of people don't necessarily then start spending at that level. They're like, okay, even if I spend more, it's not going to change my life. I already figured out who I am and what is fun for me and what makes me happy and all those things. So, and sometimes, right, struggle has to find you. There's nothing you can teach a person until struggle finds them and teaches them.
Yeah, one of the things that we teach at the Come Up series is the 70-30, approach to your budgeting. And that is, the 70-30 where you invest 70% and live off 30%, or at least do a baseline, see where you're at now. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Like, what's your expenses looking like? The aspiration is 70-30, but as you make more money, like that 30% increases. So now it's about like, okay, well, can you do 80-20? It's been something that Mark and we do now. All the things that we teach, we do them ourselves. To see that as a way to kind of like combat like the ego that we talked about earlier and entitlement. Because when you don't have, like, it is tempting to just be like, woo, let's go, let's spend it all, have one little hurrah. But you really got to think about like, okay, this was something that I planned for, or I try to instill this 30-day rule. If I see something, it's like, okay, if it wasn't a part of my monthly, I don't call it budget. I actually hate the word budget, so I call it a money plan. If it's not a part of my monthly money plan, then it has to wait until next month's money.
I see.
And if I still want it, then I'll just add it to that monthly money plan. But, it's hard, it's really hard.
And we all have our kind of weaknesses, right? For some, it's clothes. Maybe for some, it's shoes or cars, right?
What are your non-negotiables? What's something that you just, it doesn't matter, you always have to have it?
Oh, for me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've got some, literally talking about shoes. I've got foot issues, so I can't negotiate on shoes. It's almost medical. I ski.
Oh, fun.
Right? So it's not something I guess I get to wear or touch every day. It's only seasonal. But I try very, very hard that every year I get double-digit number of ski days. Right? So I'm not like a crazy fanatic type that gets 50 or 100 days of skiing every year.
Where do you go?
Isha started about 15 years ago. So we just used to go to Snoqualmie because it was the most convenient, and that's where she could go. Plenty of times to learn everything. And then over time, we started going to Stevens more and Crystal. But since last 8 years or so, we've taken at least one trip out of state. Usually it's been in Colorado, but we've done California. We've done Whistler and stuff like that.
Oh,
and
Whistler. That was my first ski trip.
But going back to kind of what I value, what I value doesn't actually cost a lot. So it's something that I don't compromise on, which is outside time, outdoor time.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've been running trails in Cougar Mountain for 20 plus years, and it's turning more into walks because my knees don't like it, my back doesn't like it and all that.
I know what you mean.
But so it turns out that sometimes the things that you may discover are super valuable don't have to cost a lot, or they don't cost a lot. And one of the things that's happened over time is, I've had the chance to share this love of taking walks with other people. And so there's so many friends and clients and colleagues where we just take a walk and we chat, and sometimes we'll grab snack or food or something on the way. Honestly, like for me, it would be hard to beat that. It would probably take thousands of dollars to just beat a walk for me. Right? I don't even know if that's possible, even at thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah, walking is amazing.
And in Seattle, right? We're spoiled. We're so spoiled.
Northwest,
The air is it's like breathing out of a tank of oxygen, right? Or breathing in pure oxygen. And it's green, and the temperature is not too uncomfortable most of the year. It doesn't get too cold, doesn't get too hot, and it's wet, so you throw on a shell of some kind, right? And that's something I like, right? Which, whether it's REI or Eddie Bauer or something, Arc'teryx. So those things, I guess, it's being when you're outside and skiing, you kind of discover the right type of tech gear.
Yeah, you gotta have the gear.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, otherwise you'll be soggy and not comfortable, and it's not as fun.
I enjoy the outdoors too, and I think being out here is perfect for that. We do this camping experience. It's called the Refuge Outdoor Festival, and it's a 3-day Black and POC centered camping event. And it's really cool because it's all about breaking down those barriers to being outdoors. So if you don't have gear, there's a gear library. You don't have transportation, King County Parks or whoever will come pick you up. And it's all about just getting outdoors and having community outside. And it is one of the events that we look forward to, my husband and I and our friend group, every single year out there. And it's an amazing event. Some of those major sponsors, REI, Patagonia, North Face, all of those gear type companies, they're there and present. And it's just been, I always say, like, when you live in Seattle, it's more like you live in a region as opposed to a city, because we had access to, Canada was up the street. There's a rainforest here, for heaven's sake, like there's so much to do here that people don't fully take advantage of. So
yeah, and we're fortunate with that, and also economically, there's so much going on, right? And there's a lot of research institutions or research happening here. A lot of big companies generating a lot of wealth, and a lot of graduates who go on to find companies or found companies, and they are great mentors and so on. So Seattle's kind of firing on all cylinders. It is getting expensive. So it's kind of tricky if you're starting out to say, okay, how am I going to find a place to live initially, maybe to rent, and then eventually to buy. But maybe that's a sign of good thing, right? If it's expensive to live, maybe that means people want to live here more than maybe elsewhere.
I
But
think it's a combination of a whole bunch of stuff.
but it's tough though. It's very tough. Like if you're actually not making the six-figure tech salaries, right, and you're trying to make a living or you're trying to get a place to stay in Seattle, it's going to be tricky.
Yeah.
It's going to be tricky because I think apartments are easily very, very modest ones are over $2,000, and
Probably.
anything decent is probably $3,000.
Well, within Seattle proper, yeah.
Yeah, within a reasonable commute distance, right? Once you go into the suburbs, it's a little bit cheaper, but then you're also
far away.
paying by driving, right? Both the wear and tear and the time that you're spending on the roads and stuff like that. Well, it's been wonderful. I think we've covered many aspects of life. Maybe one of the takeaways is that we all can use more discipline and more awareness and skill around managing wealth to have a healthier relationship with wealth, and also to leverage wealth towards our own goals as opposed to constraining us, right? And becoming the goal. It's all connected, right? So you really need to be thinking about other aspects of life to really know the meaning and the true goals of life, and then you use wealth as a tool to get there.
I mean, one of my personal takeaways, and again, thank you, Haresh, for having me on, is like the things that mean the most don't cost as much. You know, the values, that time outdoors. I'm not going to take that for granted.
Happy we had a chance to sit down. So
yes,
thank you, Jolyn.
Haresh. Take care.